Now let's start out this video with a very busy slide. A couple things to mention right off the bat. First of all, I was able to get myself into the building today to cut a couple of more videos. I think there will be 3 on the respiratory system. 2, very obviously, I'm not wearing the same clothes I've been wearing because I biked in. So you'll have to deal with this for these next couple of videos, but I will try and dress a little bit differently for upcoming videos. Also, if you haven't checked, we are now closed. SC4 is closed to anyone. You can't sneak in until May 8th. So it's gone from April 13th to May 8th. So if you were thinking, oh, on April 14th I can come in, not anymore. Check the website. All right, another thing I want to point out, I've known for a long time, as probably you do too, we inhale O2 and we exhale CO2. I knew it from the time I was a little kid because my parents told me and I just trusted them. I now know why. And we're gonna have to bring in some laws of physics, Charles' law, Boyle's law, some other laws to be able to understand how do we do gas exchange. When it comes to the respiratory system, here's what it is we're attempting to do. Let me find a marker. We're attempting to do this. When we talk about cellular respiration, we're talking about taking in food. I'm going to go down on this. NO2, that's kind of the important thing for us. And we produce CO2, a waste, plus a little bit of water, and then ATP, energy. ATP energy is what keeps us alive. It's why we're all able to watch this video or ride on a board or go and ride a bike. So this is cellular respiration, which is different than the respiratory system. This takes place in the individual cells. What we're going to be talking about is ventilation and gas exchange, and it has to start out with a lot of anatomy. Like I said, right off the bat, this is a really busy slide. It's somebody's head who's got a mid-sagittal cut, and I want to talk about the different cavities that we're going to be dealing with here. What all these cavities do is this, to fundamentally allow for gas exchange. As air comes in, either through the nose or through the mouth, we want to moisten that. We want to filter it, also known as nose hairs, and we want to warm it up. So let's just focus on nose for a minute. We want to have a lot of ability to do that warming, and we want to be able to moisten it in the nasal cavity up here. This is what we consider anything above the hard palate. This is going to be one of our benchmarks here. We've got the hard palate in the front of your mouth, soft palate behind, and it terminates in a little uvula, that thing that hangs down in the back of your throat. Up here in the nasal cavity, it's not just this open tube. There are these lobes that come out, and each one of these lobes is referred to as a conche, and we've got a superior, middle, and an inferior. What this does is it gives us a whole lot of surface area to moisten and to warm the air as it comes in. The areas that we find that aren't the extensions, the conche that come out, each one of them is referred to as a meatus. So we've got the meatus, superior, middle, inferior. We've got the conche. It's not labeled middle, inferior, superior, but that's how we name these as well. This is what we call or refer to as the nasopharynx. So let me mark these things off as we go. So here's our nasopharynx. It's this entire area that's going to be superior to the hard and the soft palate. We also have coming in here the openings from the eustachian tubes, what's referred to on this as the auditory tubes, and we also have the pharyngeal tonsil. So there's a lot going on in here, but as far as we're concerned, it's all about warming, moistening, and filtering the air that's coming in so we can actually get to the job down in the lungs, which is where we really want to get to. If we go inferior, we start to deal with the oropharynx. And the oropharynx, what we're dealing with is simply, it's the area that's inferior to the palate, but it is superior to the glottis. And I'm only going to underline part of that. The glottis is this opening that we've got, that the epiglottis that I started to underline is a flap that will go down and say, hey, do you want food to go down this direction or that direction? If you've ever had anything to eat or had a drink of something and you've gone, oh my God, it went down the wrong tube, well, your epiglottis didn't do the right job. Your food or your drink might have instead gone down the trachea, which is only meant for air. Now, I'm trying to see how many areas I can break this into without doing too much. There is the laryngopharynx right here. So I'll give you time to jot that down. It's anterior to the larynx. And the larynx, which I'll briefly talk about. The larynx has got the glottis that I talked about here, which is this opening. And it's got the epiglottis, that flap that folds on top of it. And then what we consider the vocal folds, or many of us know this, is the vocal cords. We're not going to talk too much about voice and auditory issues right now. I want to talk more about breathing. Now let's talk about where we really want to go, and that's the trachea. The trachea is a pretty hard tube. It's a tube that is primarily hyaline cartilage, and once we've directed the air into the tube, let me get my mouse again. We're going to head to the lungs. Now, the trachea itself is primarily just a really hard kind of PVC-like tube. And it's going to start to bifurcate. It's going to start to branch into individual directions, what we call bronchi. So we got bronchi that are primary bronchi here and here. As they divide, they're considered secondary, pretty straightforward. As they continue to divide, they're called tertiary. And then what we end up with, and this is where we really want to get, our alveoli down here. We're going to get to what we call terminal bronchi, which is where these ultimately, after the branching, they end. Now with this slide, I don't want to jump past this. I want to address this right now. These lungs, these are essentially bags, they're sacs that are hanging in the pleural cavity. The pleural cavity is around the outside of this. And the pleural cavity, if you think back, well, we've got a parietal and a visceral layer. As the cavity expands, it's going to pull these out. As it is going to contract, it's going to push these down. That's going to be important when we get to the world of physics, with how do we exhale, how do we inhale. Also, just a little bit more anatomy. The right lung has 3 lobes, superior, inferior, middle. The left only has 2. And it's because what we've got right down here is what we call the cardiac notch. And the cardiac notch is where the heart sits. So we can't have both sides, it's a little bit off center. So we can't have both sides have the same number of lobes. And then underneath, right down here, is a really tough, strong muscle that runs right about across here called the diaphragm. So we need to figure out, how does the diaphragm work with this pleural cavity and these lungs, and that's going to be all about pushing air out, positive pressure, and pulling air in, negative pressure. Here's what we terminate in. And let me get through this, and the next slide, we'll take a break, and we'll go to slide, or video number 2. I'm still not used to doing this. So here are our little individual terminal bronchi. We get into bronchioles, even smaller, and then we get into each of these alveoli. Essentially, this looks like a bunch of grapes, and each one of these is going to be the site for gas exchange. This is the business portion of the lungs. And 2 things that I want to point out before I stop this. If you take a look, all through here we have smooth muscle. We can constrict these. If anybody has dealt with asthma or anaphylactic shock and suddenly you can't breathe, it's because all of these have tightened down. So air can't move in or out, so gas exchange doesn't really work. Other thing that I want you to envision and take note of is this network of capillaries. The capillaries are all over each one of these alveoli because they're going to play a big role in gas exchange. This is where we want to focus on that gas exchange between your lungs and your circulatory system. This is one individual little tiny air sac. We've got 3 different types of cells that we find in here to be able to keep this thing inflated, be able to take care of anything that got through your nasal cavity and got down here that might be bad. That's what this one's going to do. And this is what I want to talk about, a type 1, type 2, and I don't think it's called a type 3, but there's a 3rd type of cell that floats around in here. Once we get past that, I want to talk about inhalation, exhalation, and then very quickly, I want to talk about the physiology. So we'll see how I did, and I'm going to kill this video, and we'll start up in another minute or 2. Email me if you have questions.